This is a special unit the size of a standard cargo container, but the contents are anything but ordinary, because there are 15 million black soldier fly larvae inside. And pretty soon these containers will be popping up all over Australia in massive amounts. Billions, or maybe even trillions of larvae will spread throughout the whole continent. But why did Australia decide to cover itself with fly larvae? What's the point? Unfortunately, I couldn't find the answer. Just kidding, I found it. A little coffee and let's get going. Just an unobtrusive reminder for those who forget to hit the like button, don't forget to do it. This isn't a request, just a reminder for those who usually do it but sometimes forget. Now picture this, a farm of big, buzzing black soldier flies that are multiplying like crazy. The worst nightmare for any tourist city, and even the ones that aren't touristy too. Nevertheless, for Australian cities, such farms might become a reality, and there's alarmingly little time left before they might appear. Even a farmer who decided to raise flies had to overcome his disgust and try not to focus on the horror that almost everyone feels when seeing wriggling larvae. To me, they look pretty cute. Itty-bitty, slimy, disgusting little critters. Have you pictured the farm where all of this is happening? Well, these farms want to set up shop in the basements of shopping malls. Yes, larvae. That's exactly what you want to think about while shopping for clothes or hanging out at the food court. Bon appetit! By the way, my apologies to those who decided to eat while watching this video. It's gonna get worse from here, guys. By the way, making this video didn't ruin my appetite, but I warn you, just in case, though it's probably too late now. So breeding black soldier fly larvae is currently the most common form of insect farming in the world. It's so widespread that there's a specific breeding protocol, and there's little that's pleasant about it. Each morning, fly eggs are collected from the enclosures, which are basically large rooms where flies mate and produce offspring. One female fly can lay up to 600 eggs, which are gathered into trays and taken to the incubator. There, the trays of eggs are placed on a small wire platform over a bin of compost. The compost consists of the leftovers from organic food waste. Yes, if you didn't finish your pizza, little larvae will take care of it for you. Then, in fully controlled climate conditions, larvae quickly hatch from the eggs. They're then moved again, this time to the growing room. This is where the entire process is controlled, including temperature, humidity, and food supply, so the larvae grow healthy and as quickly as possible. They reach their maximum body mass in just 6 days, and during this time they consume nutrients fast, very fast, and a lot of them. In a day, they can eat an amount of food twice their own weight. However, these gluttonous larvae are not destined to become adult flies. They have a completely different fate awaiting them. So what's the connection between Australia and swarms of larvae? Let me explain. As you watch this video, 1 million larvae are living in one of the barns in Canberra. They live at Gotera, a robotic insect farm that began as a startup in 2016. Right now, Gotera is the biggest project in Australia dealing with insect farming, but it all started completely by chance. The founder of Gotera, Olympia Yarger, originally planned to set up a free-range poultry farm and was looking for an affordable feed alternative for the chickens. Regular feed was expensive, and after some Googling, Olympia learned about insects. They seemed like a decent alternative. She started raising larvae and got so into it that the poultry farm never actually came to be. Gradually, there were more and more insects, and it became clear that 70% of the farm's expenses were spent on buying food for them. Olympia's thoughts went further, and the idea came up, why spend money on buying food for them when human food waste is completely free because no one wants it? It turned out that transporting these useless food scraps to the farm was expensive and time-consuming, so Olympia decided to do the opposite and transport the larvae to the food scraps. That's how the system came about. A container with larvae delivered to the company is equipped with a robot. The company throws the food scraps to the robot, and it feeds the larvae and sorts the scraps according to their needs. Want details? Even if you don't, I'm going to tell you anyway. It all starts with getting larvae. We've already figured out how they come into the world. Larvae, like any other product, need to be collected when they're in their prime. That way they can eat more waste. At 5 days old, they're put into containers, and these containers are remotely controlled, even connected to the internet. Not to watch YouTube though, I guess? While the larvae sit in their containers, a special machine separates food waste from packaging. Then it grinds the waste into a paste and feeds it into a robotic system, which is essentially a huge feeding area for the larvae. This system creates the perfect environment for the larvae, collects information, and tracks to ensure food is delivered every day. Luckily, there's no need to keep an eye on every larva because one transport container holds between 10 and 15 million larvae. Well, after the larvae have eaten the food scraps, the scraps turn into a highly valuable, low-toxicity protein and fertilizer, all in just 12 days. To give you an idea of how fast this is, traditional composting usually takes up to 16 weeks. Cool? Certainly is. Moreover, all these high-tech things are already in use. For example, the maggot robot works in the Woolworths supermarket and in the Barangaroo area in Sydney. True, the data on it has become slightly outdated, but as of November 2022, Maggot had already processed over 35,000 tons of waste. Not long ago, the largest hotel in Australia, Hyatt Regency with 878 rooms located near Darling Harbour, started using the system. The news about the order came out in early August, and if you believe the journalists, this is the first hotel in the world to work with food waste this way. It's worth mentioning that larvae are not picky at all, so you can place them anywhere. They eat everything you offer them, including food waste from offices, restaurants, and bakeries, coffee grounds from McDonald's, and agricultural byproducts like wheat husks, and everything left over from making wine. By the way, unlike harmful flies, the black soldier fly in its adult state doesn't need food. In other words, nature didn't give this fly a mouthpiece, so it doesn't bite or spread diseases, making it safe for people. This is one of the reasons why this species was chosen for breeding, and it's these larvae that will soon be covering Australia. Well, metaphorically speaking, almost. Soon, Sydney will become the first place in New South Wales where trials will be conducted using larvae to tackle food waste. And not with the ones collected from malls, but with the waste that's already piled up in landfills. It's planned that insects will turn food scraps into essential ingredients for making food. Not in the sense that we'll eat what the larvae didn't finish, of course. Just about 600 tons of food waste will be turned into animal feed and fertilizer in just 12 months. As you remember, larvae eat very quickly. But why can't we just leave waste in landfills like before? The problem is that as it decomposes in landfills, it releases methane. And it does this so actively that it accounts for about 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions. You already know that our planet has enough problems with gases, even without me telling you. So using larvae is a new and apparently trustworthy solution to this problem. It creates a perfect closed-loop system from an economic standpoint, turning what was once considered waste into new products. And if everything goes as planned, the project will cut down on waste and methane emissions and, as a bonus, help with food production. With one shot, you'll kill two birds. First, you'll tackle the issue of feeding livestock. Today, 70% of the costs in livestock production go to feed, meaning protein grown or developed for animal feed. Remember, the whole startup began with the attempt to find an alternative to feed with larvae. That's because over the past 2 years, feed costs have risen by 40 to 60%. Since markets, well, let's just say they're not very stable, the world has kinda gone crazy. But there is a second goal they hope to achieve: freeing up space in landfills. Experts warn that in Sydney, this space is running out, and it's running out quickly. Sydney's increasingly sending its waste outside the city. According to some experts, by 2028, Sydney might not be able to bury trash within the city limits at all. Of course, we don't live in the Middle Ages, so there won't be a situation where trash is lying around the streets because there's no more room in the landfills. At least we want to hope so. Solid waste generated by the activities of over 5 million people and businesses in Sydney is transported by freight trains to regional landfills. And that's a problem because the rail service is occasionally interrupted due to natural events. The tracks wear out, but the trash keeps piling up no matter the weather. And that's where larvae come to the rescue. What's more, you don't even need to force or teach them anything. They just live their lives and, in the process, help make ours better. They don't even suspect what ambitious goal has been set for them. By 2025, thanks to the larvae, no food waste should end up in landfills. None at all. So this means that from a situation where there's not enough room in landfills, Australia will switch to a situation where the number of landfills will drop because they're no longer needed. It's just some kind of environmental celebration. So the question comes up, what happens to the larvae when they, well, stop eating? In fact, it's quite simple because after they're done working, there are two products left: insect waste and the larvae themselves. This happens on the 17th day of their life, when it's time to turn into a fly, which never actually happens. The larvae are sent to the processing room where they're sifted from the frass, then washed in a large sieve with water to make sure everything is clean, and then put to sleep with carbon dioxide. Next, they're dehydrated and the larvae become feed for livestock. And not just for livestock, the proteins they turn into are eaten by both birds and fish. Besides, the larvae are rich in melanin, chitin, and lauric acid, and their oil is comparable to palm oil. For example, it can be used in cosmetics, melanin can be used in the electronics industry, and yes, we're still talking about insects that can be fed our food waste. It's hard to believe that these tiny, unappealing little sausages can give us so many benefits. And we haven't even gotten to the manure yet, as they feed larvae produce waste that's very valuable as fertilizer. This micromanure is rich in nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, making it an ideal fertilizer. So it's put to use too, collected and then sold to anyone interested, farmers or nurseries, pet stores, or aquaculture. So these larvae seem like they could solve a huge number of human problems. Maybe we should just cover all the dumps with them and wait. That was my first thought. But unfortunately, scientists have already figured out that it's not possible. For the larvae to live and thrive, controlled conditions are needed, with strict parameters for everything. In larva breeding chambers, a specific temperature is maintained to encourage maximum productivity. Flies are subtropical and won't mate or lay eggs if it's too cold for them. Too hot's bad too. Heat can actually kill them. The same goes for larvae. In the cold, they'll refuse to eat, and in high temperatures, they'll just roast. And in hot Australia, this is the most realistic scenario, and larvae crawling around the dump searching for organic matter won't be as effective as those that have the organic matter served to them on a silver platter. Plus, being out in the open brings the risk of birds and other animals starting to eat the larvae, and in the end, a large part of them will just die. What does this all mean? Money and other resources will be spent to grow these larvae, and then they'll be dumped in landfills, but they won't be able to process enough waste. It's an economically pointless endeavor. It's much more beneficial to give waste to larvae rather than scatter larvae over waste. By the way, this is practiced not only in Australia but also in other countries. In Indonesia, for example, waste problems are the same for everyone. In Indonesia, they've been using larvae for many years. The main problem is that you can't just scatter them over a dump. The larvae won't survive, and the job won't get done. They can only be placed on already sorted trash so that organic waste isn't mixed up with plastic, and sorting is still an issue in Indonesia. But that's where they offer each household to just get their own larvae and feed them organic waste right on the spot. That way you won't have to haul trash around or sort it on an industrial scale, and everyone will be happy, especially the larvae. Fruit flies rush to the rescue. While some are breeding flies in Australia, others are working hard to fight them. The Queensland fruit fly is a pest that costs the Australian horticultural industry about $300 million a year. These insects act like any other fruit flies. They lay eggs in fruit, then the larvae hatch and start eating the fruit, causing it to rot and drop off prematurely. Previously, pesticides were used to control the flies, but now that's banned. However, a new method has been found. Sterile fruit flies were bred at the Modern National Sterile Insect Centre in Port Augusta, South Australia. They breed Queensland fruit flies there and then sterilize them with x-rays. Sterile flies are released into areas with wild populations to mate with wild females. In the end, the number of wild female flies decreases and they die out. To make this happen, 2 million sterile flies were dropped from a plane over a quarantine zone where they spotted their wild relatives. 2 million. It sounds like something out of a sci-fi novel, but it might actually not be enough, and scientists want to increase the number of flies dropped to 50 million a week. Hope it works. Chickens approved. In Cambridgeshire, there's a unique poultry farm, the first in the UK to install a machine that produces familiar larvae for chickens. All the farm owners need to do is provide electricity and food waste to the system and then feed the grown larvae to their chickens. Chickens have already come to appreciate such a variety in their diet. Turns out they prefer eating larvae much more than pellets, the usual feed on these farms. The chickens bite less and peck at each other less, plus the new diet encourages them to behave naturally, searching for food. After all, this is what chickens have evolved to do over millions of years, to scratch around in the dirt to find something tasty. With the new menu, they even started laying eggs on the floor less often. And that's a big plus because such eggs are considered low quality. But chicken logic is very simple. Now they're uncomfortable laying eggs where everyone is looking for food. That isn't a public place, so the birds go to their nests and their owners get extra profit. It was also found that feeding live insects has a positive effect on birds' immune systems. Farmers didn't even have to give their chickens antibiotics. And that also has enormous potential. You sure you're a doctor? Meanwhile, Biomonde supplies maggots of the Lucilia sericata species for treating non-squeamish patients all over Europe. To undergo such treatment, you really need to have a strong stomach, because these are the flesh flies, and they use them for cleaning wounds. Today, hundreds of hospitals in the UK and clinics in Germany are already using larvae of these flies to speed up the healing process, and it works. Scientists are reviving an age-old tradition that was practiced by the Maya tribes in Central America and by indigenous Australians. During World War I, American doctor William Bear discovered that wounds with maggots in them healed much faster than without them. He started growing maggots on the hospital windowsill to treat patients with osteomyelitis, bone inflammation. By the end of the 1930s, 300 hospitals in the US and Canada were using maggots, but then penicillin and other antibiotics came along and replaced the old treatment methods, and now they've come back to them amidst increasing antibiotic resistance. But don't imagine these are larvae crawling in sewers or garbage cans. They're cultivated in clinical settings, so they're totally safe. Though the idea of such wound healing still feels a bit weird. Larvae are making cheese for us. Casu marzu is a delicacy from Sardinia made with the help of larvae. The larvae are special because they come from the cheese fly, Pyophila casi. Regular cheese making means heating milk and adding bacterial cultures and enzymes for fermentation. But in casu marzu, fermentation is done with larvae, and it goes exactly how you'd imagine. Flies lay their eggs directly into pecorino cheese and the larvae ferment it. But it's more like decomposition, and it's not just gross. Casu marzu is even known as the most dangerous cheese in the world because the eggs and larvae might enter the digestive tract and survive, bringing various infections with them. Because of this, the cheese was banned in Italy and the EU, resulting in illegal production and sales on the black market for enormous amounts of money. Later, they attempted to get around the ban by labeling casu marzu as a traditional dish, but its status remains quite dubious. Also, casu marzu is one of the few cheeses banned in the United States. Larvae are creating paintings. What else can larvae do? It seems they're capable of just about anything. And now they have the chance to create their own works of art. Of course, the larvae themselves probably didn't appreciate this opportunity, but people were thrilled. They covered hundreds of fly larvae with paint, creating abstract paintings out of it. By the way, Dr. Matthew Cobb, an expert on animal behavior from the University of Manchester, mentioned that he wanted to create larval versions of the famous action painting by American abstractionist artist Jackson Pollock. Well, it might be beautiful if you like contemporary art and larvae. And the likes, by the way, you owe me exactly one. See you later.